And welcome back to MIZ-STL on the Lou Information Station. We're live and on demand at louinfo.com. Grant Salzman, Brendan Schaefer, and as always, Hannah Barton here with you on a Wednesday morning. Brendan, how are you this Wednesday morning off of a win over, who was it? 29-20. South Carolina Gamecocks.
I have to be careful today, Grant. I have to be careful. I really like Hannah. Hannah's a lovely person.
Awesome person.
And I'm not going to try to rub it in any further. It was the competitive game that I expected. But I think it says a lot about Mizzou and their team that they were able to find a way to emerge with this win. It was, I was there in the stands for this one. It was nip and tuck back and forth, but the Tigers end up getting it done. And I am, I'm still basking in the glow a little bit, but I know that we've got somebody on the line who is probably down in the dumps about the results. So I'm going to be respectful of that, Grant. I really am.
Yeah, and it's a week you can bask in the glow because I probably won't even be able to watch this game, and I won't go out of my way to. I'll explain that later in the show. Hannah.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Well, first of all, Brendan, I appreciate the respect. I would be a little bit dishonest if I said I was super excited to come on and talk about this past weekend's result.
Well, why is
That's
that?
fair. That's fair. I mean, that's fair.
I'm being facetious.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I agree with Brendan. It was a competitive game. It was kind of what both fan bases wanted and expected in terms of it being a battle, obviously a battle of the Columbias. And I'm happy for my Mizzou fans because I know that this was a heartbreaking loss for them last season. And, it's always good to come and get a revenge win at home. And I wouldn't say I'm more upset that Missouri won. I'm more upset that South Carolina lost, if that makes sense, and lost in the way that they did. Anytime you see your team put up negative rushing yards and have more penalties, not penalty yards, more penalties than rushing yards, you get a little bit worried.
They had more penalties than the negative rushing yards they had, I believe.
In fairness, I mean, Grant had more rushing yards than South Carolina on Saturday.
I was on the field.
You were down there.
I led South Carolina in rushing on Saturday.
Wow.
I think probably anybody not wearing a Gamecock uniform had more rushing yards than South Carolina on Saturday.
Yeah. You know that old saying, like, if you were thrown into the NFL or a college football game, could you gain 1 yard? That Mizzou defense said no, you could not gain 1 yard. Now, obviously, it's a little skewed because they do the stupid thing where sacks are negative. Like in reality, Missouri held South Carolina about 15, 20 rushing yards, which is still pretty darn good. The sacks being negative, I think, is the dumbest stat thing in all of sports, but we don't need to touch on that. But I do want to talk more about Brendan. I know we normally start off with Mizzou. We have a lot of time in the next 2 weeks or so to talk Mizzou. On Wednesdays, we kind of zoom out. That's why I want to start a little bit more and go deeper on South Carolina. What are, Hannah, some of the frustrations? Because I think that we, entering the season, did a little too much hype. I'm not saying Lenore Sellers is bad, but I think we focused solely on him. And, well, look how great he is. He's going to be a Heisman favorite. And maybe we didn't see some of the fool's gold, I guess, underneath South Carolina's real problems, which right now is that O-line and kind of the run defense as well, obviously.
Yeah, I think part of it is for South Carolina in terms of replacing an offensive line and replacing a defensive line has been something that they've struggled with and struggled to do in recent years. But I think seeing last year the way that both were able to develop throughout the season gave South Carolina fans kind of this hope that, well, if they were able to do that throughout the season, just wait with what they're going to be able to do with the whole off season. And, they hit the portal. They got people in positions that they needed to replace. I think we knew the defense was not going to look the exact same. However, we had confidence in our defensive staff and what they've been able to do in terms of developing the next guys up. And I think a lack of talent is not the issue with this South Carolina team, which has sometimes been the case in the past where it's like, listen, we just are really light on this end or really, struggling. I think the one area where you just aren't having the star power that you need in terms of just solid guys to perform is obviously going to be the offensive line. And when you've got two running backs that have tons of experience in college football, one of which put up, 1,100 yards plus in a season last year. When you've got a quarterback like Lenora Sellers and a returning wide receiver core like South Carolina does, you've got some great guys at tight end that have had some time to experience and that are finally healthy. It is frustrating when you finally feel like you have all those offensive tools, and then you're struggling on the offensive line. And I think, part of it is the way the offensive line got beat up. I mean, we saw versus Missouri, we had someone different starting at center. We had Boaz Stanley, who had been center the first couple games, had to move over because of Casey Henry's injury, but then you've got more injuries coming. And so you already have an offensive line front that coming into the season was a little bit new and maybe not, the most confident that you would like to be in it. And then you add in injuries. I think another thing that's been frustrating for South Carolina fans has been, the defense and the lack of the defense really being able to create turnovers. That was a huge part of South Carolina's defense last year, was that you were going to have defensive touchdowns. I mean, anyone who watched the South Carolina-Oklahoma game, I mean, my goodness, 3 defensive touchdowns in the first quarter, like that's a defense that was being talked about as one of the top in the country. And I think we knew it wasn't going to be maybe at that caliber, but in what this team has built as its identity, what part of the defensive identity in recent years has been the ability to create turnovers. And you really haven't seen that as much.
Now, do you think that part of watching the game with the run game, they just didn't run the ball? Only 11 carries for running backs / receivers. Lenora Sellers had 10 carries for negative 28 yards. It's hard to actually know. I don't know how many designed carries he had. They didn't really run the ball. Another thing, Hannah, that I was wondering, and I think Brendan might agree with this, it looked like they could have thrown the ball 15 times to Nick Harbor, and if he just ran straight grows every single time, he would have probably burnt and caught the ball 10 times. Why don't they throw it to him? Because I think he's one of the more talented receivers in college football. He only gets 3 receptions, but I feel like this happens a lot with Harbor, is he's kind of underutilized.
Yeah, I think starting with the run game situation, I think it goes back to, again, like the struggles with the offensive line. And then I think in terms of the design run plays for Lenoris, I think coming off, him getting rattled with that injury, they probably wanted to limit the amount where he could maybe be put in more risky positions running that ball. So I'm not too surprised with that, but I am a little bit disappointed in the lack of utilization of, like I said, 2 7th-year running backs that have proven to have had success and both of which are very great at yards after contact. But I think it shows kind of the struggles with the offensive line. And again, with Nick Harbor, I mean, you said it, he's someone where he's going to be the fastest guy on the field every time he steps out there. I mean, he's an NCAA qualifier in track and field, an Olympic trials qualifier in track and field who, didn't participate in track season this past spring with solely, the purpose to focus on football. And that's when you kind of start wondering, how much of this is, what are the plays being called by the offense? And then how much of it is the execution of these plays being the issue? Because I'm always someone, I'm never going to jump to fire the coach, change the coach. That's going to be your automatic fix, because that can sometimes create more harm than good. I think you do have to take a step back and say, okay, this offense and this offensive line may not look the way that we had originally thought. How do we start calling plays that we think, one, will utilize the talent that we have better, and 2, that our guys will be able to execute better. And I think another part was, I mean, Lenora Sellers kind of looked like the Lenora Sellers we saw early on last season.
Yeah.
His decision making was not as good as it's been, you know, and one thing that he improved significantly on the end of last season was his decision making. And it kind of looked like he took a couple steps backwards this past weekend. If that had to do with the fact that he was banged up. But that was something that stuck out to me as well.
And I hope you feel better. I wanted to give you that platform to get your get your frustrations out. Now,
well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Now, Brendan Schaefer, I'll give you your platform to give your good feelings out about what the Missouri Tigers did on Saturday.
Well, and I mean, Hannah spun on with a lot of the analysis on South Carolina. The other side of that coin, obviously, is the things that Missouri was doing to try and ultimately succeeding in forcing South Carolina out of its element. You know, when it comes to running the ball, I think that's right. Like, it really did feel like every time they handed the ball off to a running back, it was a win for the Mizzou defense. And so you were enjoying it as a Tiger when they would do it on first down and sometimes on second down. Obviously, Mizzou had enough problems in the secondary when it comes to its zone coverage to kind of negate some of the benefit of being in a 3rd and long, because it didn't necessarily mean that you were about to get off the field with the number of times that they were able to convert. And look, Lenora Sellers definitely on the decision-making front, but I think with some of the holes in that defense that Missouri had, he's still one of the top quarterbacks in the conference, if not the country, and so was able to hit on a number of those throws when the open man was out there, and he did use his legs to extend plays and make special plays. So that was still part of the reason that maybe Missouri's secondary looked a little bit lesser than it is. I don't know that there's a better quarterback on Mizzou's schedule the rest of the way. There might be a couple that are just as good or almost as good, but I still very much respect what Lenora Sellers can do.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly thinking back to last year's 353-yard performance against Mizzou. He threw for over 300 yards in this one, but it was a very one-dimensional effort. So Mizzou's run defense in the front 7 really deserves a lot of credit for the way that it was able to, negate things for South Carolina's offense. And then on the other side of the ball, Missouri's offensive identity was, if we didn't know it already, it was really firmly established in this game that, we can just chew clock, run the ball on you. And if we've got a lead, good luck, because, we're going to be able to assert our will up front and get 6, 7, 8, 12-yard chunks of Ahmad Hardy. And then when he's tired, Jamal Roberts is going to come in with the fresh feet and the fresh legs and break an arm tackle and be off to the races as well, because he's got the burst and the juice to be able to do that. So I think Bo Pribula is such a great fit for what this offense brings, because he can also chip in the run game, had 72 yards on the ground, and can largely make the decisions that keep the ball in Missouri's hands and don't make the mistakes that can cost you a game. Really, I think the one mistake he made was in what I would have liked to have been a 4-minute drill heading into halftime with 3 minutes and 53 seconds on the clock. Threw a ball into double coverage that I think was just trying to bite off a little bit more than he could chew. I think the Mizzou offense was amped up at that point because they really had all the momentum in their favor. My preference in that moment would have been to run the football, because we saw how well that was working and continued to work. Keep it in your hands and probably chew out the rest of that 4-minute clock. And then Mizzou gets the ball in the second half. That's the one mistake, though, that Pribula made, and really probably the worst mistake of his season, and there haven't been many. So if that's something that you can learn from, and then just continue to say, hey, look, our identity as an offense is to trust our defense. We're going to fix some things in the secondary and have those one possession games where we're up by 3 to 5 to 7 points go in our favor, because we're going to be able to chew out the clock. Mizzou asserted their will at both sides of the line of scrimmage in this game. And I really think that was something that they can use moving forward to say, yep, we can do this against Louisiana. We can do it against Kansas. Now we show we can do it against an SEC opponent, and a quality one at that. I thought that was a really big deal from the way that Saturday's game unfolded.
Yeah, it was like taking that next test. And you mentioned the interception. You were there, Brendan. Once he threw that pick, and then they go, South Carolina scores in 4 plays, the environment in that stadium just dropped. And it was, oh, no. Especially you get that field goal, it gets tense on the other side when they were driving to go up 2 scores. The North Sellers takes a very silly sack, and they end up getting 3 after having a 3rd and 35 from their own 50.
3rd and 37. And
3rd and 37, pardon me.
Yards.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
But I wanted to go with Sellers. He missed some throws. He obviously missed that deep post that gave Missouri. I mean, he was open by
in the first
30
quarter.
yards. But
nobody near him.
There were some throws he missed to open guys. But what you might not have seen if you were watching the broadcast is there was a lineman in his face every time he tried to throw the ball almost. Like the fact that he even completed as many passes he did with the pressure that he had all night was impressive. And it's doubly frustrating, Brendan, that it's not like the secondary's having to cover for 5-6 seconds and they're getting burnt. This D line is so good that you just got to cover for 2.5 seconds and you're good. And they've struggled to do that. That's the glaring error right now in this team is the secondary.
Yeah, and that was addressed by Eli Drinkwitz already this week in his press conference. Heck, he addressed it in the postgame press conference. You don't normally hear
sick
Eli
of this
Drinkwitz
crap.
You don't hear him as pointed as that very often, but I think this is something that, look, these are conversations that have been ongoing since last season. The South Carolina game in Columbia, South Carolina was this way with that final drive where they were able to, Johnny Walker almost has Lenore Sellers pinned down and he escapes the pocket, but the inability to cover and the zone coverage was a thing all last year. There were miscommunications as well. It was, you could say, like, it's not even the talent of the players. It's clearly like the combination of their ability to run the scheme and to know what their role is on a given play and what the call is even, I think, is how that led to a number of those defensive breakdowns. Like there was one last year in the Buffalo game. There was one against Vanderbilt. Like this happened almost on a weekly basis to where a big topic of conversation coming into the season for Mizzou was, okay, the secondary wasn't very good last year. They didn't graduate guys. Like they're kind of the same players, but they brought in guys like Mose Phillips. They brought in Jalen Catalon. And like, this is supposed to, Stephen Hall was a transfer. Like they brought in additional competition to where the cream was supposed to rise and you were going to have a more sturdy secondary. I think the miscommunications have gone unchecked though. It hasn't changed. It's been fixed. And so when it's something that's dated back to last year with this defensive coordinator, Corey Batoon, and his staff and the players that they had, it's the same guys that were involved last year, except in theory, you got better players or more of them to be able to decide who the best ones are that need to see the field most frequently. And the same mistakes are happening. And so that's why you hear Drinkwitz after the South Carolina game, call out the coaching, call out the players and say, we're going to have to look at the film together. And I'm going to be on some guys' asses this week because this cannot continue. There's no reason our secondary is this porous. Like he was very pointed in the criticism. Tuesday had a little bit more of a calm demeanor about it, but explained where some of the breakdowns were and just said, we were supposed to be in cover 2 in this, and this safety came up and he wasn't in the right spot. Like it's very rudimentary type stuff. It seems to be. And I guess I can give you confidence that, okay, it's not the players that they're untalented. There's just miscommunication. It's rampant. It has to be fixed, but I think the players are capable of doing it. But man, when it's gone unchecked for this long, it is a concern that, like, and he said it a number of times, like, are we throwing too much? Is it too complicated? Are we trying to be a jack of all trades instead of just focus on the things that we're really good at? Do they need to scale back the defensive play sheet and say, this is our base defense. This is what we're going to run. And we just have to kind of stick with it and be good at that before we try to get too cutesy with some of the coverages that we're trying to run. I think that's a great way to approach it. My concern is that he's talked like this before and it's still happening. The good news is you've got a bye game in UMass and then a bye week before Alabama, but that has got to be hammered home in practice. And it's incumbent upon not only the coaches, but the players to take it upon themselves to know that the execution has got to be better.
Well, that's what I've said too, is like, I'm not totally out on the secondary yet, but you have basically 2 bye weeks. You play UMass, then you have the bye week. If you can't get it tuned up by Alabama, I don't know if there's a time that you will get it tuned up.
It's time now. The time is now.
And I would have to watch some film on this, but just from watching, one of the more complicated things is when you're running a man zone, where the corners, they're switching maybe guys. If they cross, they're covering a different section or a different man than what they started with originally. But it doesn't really look like Missouri's doing much of that. It seems like it's either zone or man, pretty rudimentary stuff, like you said, and they're still getting confused. That's what I think is a little frustrating. But this win, I think that obviously our perceptions of South Carolina have changed. I think you would agree with that, Brendan, Hannah. You would agree with that. but I still think this Gamecock team can win some games. I mean, they play Kentucky, then at LSU, home against Oklahoma, home against Bama, at Ole Miss, at A&M. Brutal gauntlet, but they're going to win some of those games. I think they can be an 8-4 team, and I think that this will be a nice feather in Missouri's cap if they're 10-2 at the end of the year with a bunch of other 10-2 teams. Like, look, we got South Carolina. They're a good team. Do you agree with that, Hannah, or are you pessimistic that it might be lost LSU, lost Oklahoma, Bama, Ole Miss, A&M, all losses?
Well, I'm a little bit conflicted because, I mean, obviously with the expectations going into this season for South Carolina, like, you're looking at it and you're like, well, these are games that, like, you know, we feel like we should win. Obviously, there's not as much wiggle room now. It's looking at it to a type of thing where, okay, we could obviously, we have Kentucky at home, which for those that don't know, Kentucky is kind of like a sneaky rival for South Carolina.
Really?
Because we've had so many close matchups in recent years, excluding last year. Mark Stoops and Shane Beamer have a little bit of like an underlying beef. Mark Stoops mocked Shane Beamer a couple of years ago at SEC Media Days. And so it's kind of just been a thing since then. So I think that's a really good kind of bounce back game for them to have at home before you go to LSU, which is obviously going to be a challenge to say the least. And then hosting Oklahoma, hosting Alabama. I'm personally more worried about Oklahoma than I am about Alabama.
Oh.
I don't know the way. Well, actually, I was.
We have some John Mateer news to talk about.
But yeah, I mean, I like I said before, there's no question that this team has talent. You know, like that's not the issue. I think the issue is just figuring out their identity and what is going to work and what is going to click. Because there is yet to be a time where South Carolina has stepped on the field for a game this season where you're like, oh, that's their team. That is what South Carolina looks like this year. And so honestly, I think until I see that, I'm not going to sit here and firmly say, like, I think we can put together a solid 8 wins, but I really hope that that's the case.
You know what that sounds like, Brendan? Take South Carolina with the points on Saturday when we do our picks later.
Yeah, lay the points. I'm sure they're favored.
Yeah,
I'm sure
definitely.
They're favored.
But they sound angry.
And I'm going to push back on the 8-4 thing that you gave, Grant. I just don't think that necessarily is likely. It's in play. Okay. Like, I'll give them Kentucky. I think one of Oklahoma, Alabama, you win. You probably drop the other one. Both home games. So I think, you're really going to want to get them both. At LSU, like, I'm not overly convinced that that's out of play because I think when we look at LSU as the number 4 team in the country, it's based on that Clemson win, and Clemson's terrible. South Carolina is going to beat Clemson. Like, there's no question in my mind. I hope they're an underdog because they shouldn't be in that last game of the season.
And then
I think Clemson will be exposed enough by then that I don't think that we're going to get great value on that line. But, like, South Carolina is going to beat Clemson. They're going to beat Coastal. They're going to beat Kentucky. That gets you to 5. They'll get one of Oklahoma. Alabama gets you to 6. Can they win a game on the road at Ole Miss or A&M? Those are the ones that are going to be tough. I think 7-5 is definitely a number that I would feel pretty comfortable saying that South Carolina can attain. Finding that 8th could be difficult because, again, I mean, when you were thinking about college football playoff with this team, you were probably banking the Vandy win, and the Missouri win was one that I said all along was going to be the swing game for the two programs. Missouri still has its whole season ahead of them. Without any blemishes yet. It's going to get tough on the back half for sure. But for South Carolina, the margin for error is completely dissipated. Frankly, I think they got to win Kentucky as a given, and then they have to win that LSU game to sort of set up the back-to-back home games that follow to say, like, our season is still very much in play because anything is possible, but it's just the gauntlet that comes up when you haven't kind of passed the early tests is where it's going to get pretty difficult for the Gamecocks.
Could a 6-6 season warm up Beamer's seat at all, Hannah? Because there's been some rumblings. It's warm. It's getting warmed up. Could it at all affect him, or do you think he's got some?
It would maybe add a little bit of heat, but I don't think it's going to put him in any sort of position where he's necessarily on a hot seat. I mean, it definitely wouldn't look great, but I think Shane Beamer is fine in Columbia for now, for sure. Now, if, next season rolls around with all the success they've had in recruiting and all these types of things, and you put together another 6 or 7 win season, that's then that's when there's going to be a serious conversation.
I mean, am I out of touch here to say that Shane Beamer might be overrated? And this is now his 5th season as South Carolina head coach. 2021, he goes 7-6. 2022, 8-5. 2023, 5-7. Last year, they go 9-4. And now they're 2-2. He's 31-24. I'm not saying he's a bad coach. I just think he gets a little over. I don't think his job security is as secure as maybe some people think it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because you have to look at the program that he took over. I think that Shane Beamer's biggest issue in recent years has been the assistant piece and the coordinator piece, because I think the offensive and coordinator specifically, and just some of your main position coaches have kind of been coming in and out in recent years. And that's the question. Is that a Shane Beamer thing, or is that because they come in, they do well, and they move on to the next job? You don't want to be a program that is constantly considered a stepping stone. You want to be looked at as kind of like a final destination for certain coaches. And I feel like that might be part of the issue right now.
Brendan, what do you make of it before we go to break here? As the outside perspective.
On Beamer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think his job security is fine. I don't think that's in play. 5-7, gets really to be a conversation, but I don't think he's fired after this season.
No.
Barring a 4-8 where the wheels completely fall off. Maybe something happens there, but even then, I think he gets another year. Is he overrated? I feel like if you look at the last season of the 9-3 and then expected, here comes the college football appearance, and that was your base expectation, then yeah, he's going to fall short of that. And look, next year we just got the schedule released last night of the 9-game slate. It's going to get more difficult for everybody to pull off 10-win seasons, and it may not happen for Shane Beamer. I don't think that he is in position to where that can be the expectation. It's an upset if it happens. So yeah, you have to kind of put him in that middle class of SEC coaches, in my opinion. And Hannah's right, where South Carolina wasn't in a place when he inherited it to be considered annual contender for CFP, but they're also not there yet. They were knocking on the door last year, and we're very close to potentially getting a bid like that. But this year it looks like they're going to be probably well outside that conversation based on the way things have gone so far. And so, I think that South Carolina is just kind of in the cushy middle of the SEC. And, if that's good enough for that program for a little while, I think that's probably fair, because Beamer did bring them out of the doldrums to an extent. But again, we got to see the way the rest of the season plays out. If you're just kind of banking at 8-4 for them, sure, that's great. But if they're more in that 6-6, then you start to look and say, all right, what do the next 2 to 3 years need to look like for him to be able to say, hey, I'm having the successful tenure here at South Carolina.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the big one in Athens, Alabama versus Georgia. If it's anything like that game last year, we're in for a treat. And then we'll discuss John Mateer's injury and the impact that has for the Oklahoma Sooners. Stay right here on MIZ-STL. Grant Salzman, Brendan Schaefer, Hannah Barton. We're live and on demand at lootinfo.com.
Hot Take Central 2.0.
Now, as you sports fans know,
it's really getting out of hand.